Hi guys, I'm Burrard-Lucas, a wildlife photographer, and in this video I'm going to be comparing the G Master 70 to 200mm lens with the G 70 to 200mm lens. This is an F2.8 lens, this is the version 2, and this is an F4 lens, also the version 2, so the latest versions of each of these lenses. So this is the G Master lens, as shown by the sort of orange G on the side, which means it's Sony's sort of premium range of lenses, whereas this is the regular G lens, as shown by the black logo there on the side, which means this is one of Sony's more value-oriented lenses. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have a few things up its sleeve that might make it perform better for you than the more expensive G Master. So obviously the most noticeable difference between these lenses, if you're looking to buy either one of them, is the price difference. The G Master lens currently is about 50 to 60% more expensive than the G version. And as you can see, the F2.8 lens is quite considerably larger than the F4 version. So let's see how the weight compares. Right, so we have the G Master first, coming in at approximately 1.24 kilograms. Now the G version is 0.92 kilograms. So that's roughly a third heavier than the F4 version. And one of the ways that this is made so compact is that to zoom to 200mm, the lens actually telescopes. So quite a major difference there. This is a telescoping lens, as you can see. When it's zoomed to 200mm, the length is roughly similar. But then when you pack it, you can retract the lens, and so it becomes much more compact for packing. On the other hand, the G Master, the zoom is all internal, so the length of the lens doesn't change at all. So that gives you quite a major advantage with the F4 version, in that it's much smaller to pack. However, that telescoping can also be seen as a disadvantage. So as it zooms, there is quite a bit more resistance than this, which is nice and smooth. And also, as the lens gets longer, the whole balance changes a bit. So if you have that nicely balanced on a tripod and you zoom into 200mm, the weight moves forwards, which shifts the balance. And you can notice that when you're both hand holding the lens or on a tripod. It's still a very light lens, so it's not as noticeable as some other telescoping lenses that you might have tried in the past. So the other thing that will be different between these two lenses is the sealing and the build quality. Really, there's no expense spared with the G Master, so you get the most premium build quality and weather sealing. The G lens, on the other hand, might not have quite the same degree of weatherproofing as the G Master, but then combined with that, it also has this telescoping action. And so as you increase the length of the lens, the volume inside the lens increases, which means it has to suck in air as it expands, and that can suck in things like fine dust or moisture. In terms of controls, what you get with the cheaper G lens is quite incredible. It's got almost all the same controls as the G Master. You've got things like these focus hold buttons which can be programmed. You've got the same bank of switches which control things like the autofocus, manual focus, the focus range and the image stabilisation settings. Obviously you've got a manual focus ring on both and the zoom ring. The main noticeable difference is that on the G Master lens you have the aperture ring, which allows you to set the aperture from the lens. If you do a lot of manual focusing, there's a larger focusing ring on the G Master, which might make it a bit easier to manipulate. So other than that aperture ring, you're pretty much getting the same controls from each. So quite a fundamental difference between these two lenses is that this is an f2.8 lens, whereas this is an f4 lens. This lets in twice as much light as this lens, which means at maximum aperture with the same ISO you would be able to get twice as fast a shutter speed with the f2.8 lens versus the f4. So shooting in low light and shooting action where you need faster shutter speeds, then you do get quite a considerable advantage by being able to shoot at f2.8. However, if you're mostly shooting in good light, where you can have nice fast shutter speeds anyway, and given that modern digital cameras do perform so well at higher ISOs, I would say that that speed advantage is probably less significant today than it ever has been. The other thing that that maximum aperture does affect though is your depth of field. And so with an f2.8 aperture, you have a much shallower depth of field. So that means when you focus on something and you have f2.8 selected, there is much less in front and behind your subject that's sharp, and it quickly fades into an out of focus area. Whereas at f4, you get more depth of field, so more in front and behind your subject will be sharp. And what that means is with an f2.8 lens, you can isolate your subject, get a beautiful creamy background and blurred details in the foreground, which does make your subject stand out and pop. With this lens, you can of course stop down more if you do want that depth of field, if you do want more of the background sharp. So you can have that greater depth of field with either lens, but if you want that option to be able to create that shallow depth of field, then f2.8 will give you quite a significant advantage there. Now perhaps my favourite feature of this G lens is that this is also a macro lens, and that means it can focus much closer in front of the lens than the f2.8 version. So whereas this has a working distance or something like that or longer, this lens can focus considerably closer, which means that when you do get close to a small subject, you can get a really nice zoomed in macro photo. So this has a magnification factor for macro photography of 0.5, and that magnification factor is across the zoom range. So you can have a longer working distance at 200mm if you're photographing a subject like a butterfly, perhaps. If you get too close it might fly off, but then if you can get closer you could go to 70mm, get that same magnification and get a wider field of view, which might bring in more context around your subject. So a really nice versatile macro lens with that zoom range. And so if I travel with this lens, that gives me that macro option and that 70 to 200mm range all in one lens. Whereas if I choose to take the G Master lens, and I think I might want to do some macro photography, I then have to take a dedicated macro lens as well, such as this 90mm macro. Let's talk about autofocus now. So I was shooting both of these lenses side by side in Africa, so I was able to really see how they perform and compare things like speed of autofocus and tracking accuracy. And both of these lenses, being Sony's latest generation of lenses, really the performance was incredible. They both have 4 XD linear focus motors, which means they can shoot through that focus range really quickly. Both are so quick that there's almost no noticeable difference between them in many situations. So the one area where the f2.8 lens has an advantage is in low light, and that's simply because the f2.8 lens lets in more light, which gives the autofocus more to work with. Image stabilisation in both lenses is there. They both have the same image stabilisation controls, OSS, the ability to turn it off and the ability to switch between different modes of stabilisation. And in the field there wasn't really any perceivable difference in the performance of that OSS in either lens. While the difference in image quality is pretty small and only really noticeable when you zoom in to 100%, you do get better image quality with the more expensive G Master lens. I think it's sharper, particularly in the corners of the picture. You get less artifacts such as chromatic aberration. I'd say the bokeh is also a bit nicer with the G Master lens. The bokeh is the quality of that out of focus area behind your subject. In conclusion, if for you it's worth carrying that heavier lens and paying that higher price tag for a lens that gives you slightly sharper images, slightly better image quality, and that faster aperture, then I think it's an easy decision to go with the G Master lens. But if you're looking for a compact travel option, a lens that can replace the 70 to 200 and the macro lens in your camera bag, then this is a fantastic option, and for me, one that's very compelling when I do need that macro option but don't want to carry that macro dedicated lens. So thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you think of these two lenses and which one you would go for.